Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Chaos Drive, and I'm working on a cyberpunk-themed precision platformer. It's been a while since my last devlog, and I know I say this every time, but there's actually a good reason for such a long gap since the last video. I switched game engines. I was using GameMaker, which I had been using for almost 10 years, but a couple months ago, I made the decision to switch to Godot. In this devlog, I'll be going over my reasons for switching and the overall process so far of remaking my game in Godot. Without further ado, let's get into it. The biggest obstacle in switching from GameMaker to Godot was obviously having to learn GDScript. I went from GameMaker, which has its own language called GML, to Godot, which also has its own language called GDScript. I'm aware that you can also code in C# in Godot, but since GDScript is the intended and most supported method, I chose to just bite the bullet and learn GDScript. Fortunately for me, Brackeys came back out of nowhere and has Godot tutorials now. So after watching a couple of his videos along with some others, I had a pretty good understanding of how to go about using the engine. I started by making my player character node using a character body 2D so I can utilize Godot's built-in physics. This was pretty simple to do, but next came the harder task of creating a state machine for my player. I'm still adjusting to the node-style programming environment, and so this did take me a while to do, but I ended up creating different nodes for each state and kept track of which state was active in the player. Each state holds a function that runs every frame for processing, a function that checks for input, and a function that manages the animations for that state. With these components, I was able to recreate the player movement, including running, jumping, crouching, sliding, and wall jumping. After finishing the basics of the player character, I decided to go straight into figuring out the lighting. This was one of the biggest reasons I made the switch to Godot. GameMaker is an engine made specifically for 2D games, and it doesn't have its own built-in lighting system. So any lighting that I wanted in my game, I would have to use an API made by other GameMaker devs, like the one I was using in previous devlogs. The problem with these lighting systems is that I could never find one of the quality and features that I wanted. I needed to have smooth lighting that casts shadows, and that also has normal map compatibility. Games like Katana Zero have dynamic lighting on their characters through the use of normal maps, and I really wanted to achieve that for my game. Katana Zero was made in GameMaker, so it's absolutely possible, but I would have had to code my own lighting system using shaders, which is something I could never really get a grip on before Godot, and I'll talk more about that later. But the reason I bring all this up is because Godot has its own 2D lighting system, which means I can get these smooth lights and shadows that I wanted. It also has normal map support, so this was a deal breaker for me. I immediately began creating normal maps for my player character, which, if you didn't know, normal maps basically tell the lights which part of the sprite to light up depending on where the light is positioned. So, after importing my normal maps, this is what the result looks like. As I'm dragging lights around the player, you can see it is coloring and lighting up different parts of them. I'm really happy about how this turned out, and I think it adds a whole nother dimension to the game. The final reason for the switch that I'll talk about in this video is pertaining to shaders. Before Godot, I couldn't write a shader for the life of me. No matter how hard I tried, it would never come out the way I wanted it to. And I believe that part of the problem was that GameMaker doesn't have any visual representation for shaders in the editor. In Godot, I can see the shader in action while I'm writing it, and as I change different values, the visual changes in real time. This is what I needed to help me understand and write shaders. Now that I've explained that, I'll showcase some of the shaders I've written. The first shader I wrote was a simple bloom shader. As my game is cyberpunk themed, there's going to be a lot of neon lights and glow, so bloom is essential. This shader runs across every pixel and it blends it with the pixels that surround it in a square shape. After making this one, I wrote another bloom shader, but instead of sampling all of the pixels around it in a square, I used a diamond shape, and this made the bloom look a lot smoother. Working off of that, I took an identical bloom shader, added scan lines, and a random glitch effect using a noise sample, and I combined all that to create a hologram shader that I'm going to use on several objects in my game. The last one I'll show here is the water shader I made. I started by reflecting whatever's on top of the water using a screen UV, and I also tinted the water to a color of choice. Then I used a noise sample to simulate the water distortion. And finally, the waves on the surface of the water were created by two sine waves moving in opposite directions to make it look more natural. And There you go, platformer water. I'm very happy with how the game's visuals have been improving, and I'll showcase a before and after here so you guys can see the comparison. There's so much more to talk about regarding the game's progress, but I'll save it for future devlogs, which will be coming out soon. Let me know in the comments if you guys like this new style of devlog, and as always, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.